Everything has a price. One secret can destroy an empire. Truth above all else.
You ever stop to think about what happened if the one person you fired, without a second thought, treated like garbage, like they didn't matter at all, ended up being the exact same person who could destroy everything you built? That girl you let go, dismissed without even bothering to learn her name properly, without caring that she was a real human being with real problems, she was never who you thought she was. And when the truth finally comes out, it's way too late to apologize. My name's Marcus Choi. I'm 35 years old and I run one of the biggest tech importation companies in Toronto. We're talking billions in revenue, corporate offices from Yorkville to the Distillery District. I grew up in a traditional Korean family. My father was ruthless, my mother preached values, but honestly, the values never stuck. What stuck was the hunger to win, to dominate, to crush anyone who stood in my way. From the time I was a kid, I learned that weakness was a liability. Showing compassion, that's for people who are okay with being average. But here's what nobody knew. There's a secret my father took to his grave when he died 5 years ago. Our empire, this massive business that I inherited, that I run with an iron fist, it didn't come from nothing. It came from betrayal. My father had a partner once, a woman named Freya Song. She was brilliant, visionary, everything a business partner should be. She brought the innovation, the contacts, the financial strategy. My father brought the connections and the greed. Together, they built something extraordinary. And then, he destroyed her. Everything started on a Tuesday in early November. I was in my office on the 32nd floor of our main building in downtown Toronto, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, glass walls, steel furniture, the kind of space that screams power to anyone who walks in. Outside, the leaves were falling, orange and red, completely irrelevant to me. Thanksgiving was coming up, that American holiday we Canadians also celebrate in October, but honestly, holidays meant nothing when you're building empires. They're distractions. My assistant James buzzed me. "Sir, the applicant from the temp agency is here for the interview. Just a heads up, her file seems incomplete." I didn't really care. Interviews were just administrative tasks, rubber stamping decisions I'd basically already made. I needed someone for the project management department, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions, someone who I could let go if the numbers didn't work out. Disposable. That was the requirement. The thing about being wealthy in Canada is that you get insulated from real consequences. You can make decisions that would ruin other people's lives and nobody ever holds you accountable. You can walk into any restaurant in Koreatown and get the best table. You can call City Hall and get things done. You don't have to think about who you hurt because everyone around you is trained to protect your interests, not theirs. She walked in, and I noticed her immediately. Min-jun Song, that was her name. I'd see it on her paperwork later. She had black hair pulled back tight, dark eyes that seemed to look right through me, and this energy that made me actually uncomfortable. Her clothes were cheap, thrift store stuff probably, or maybe discount chains like Old Navy. Nothing designer, nothing that suggested she had money or connections. Perfect, exactly the kind of person I was looking for. I didn't look at her directly. I kept typing on my laptop, ignoring her, which is a power move I'd perfected over years. Make people wait, make them uncomfortable, make them feel small. "Your name?" I asked without looking up. "Min-jun Song," she said. Her English was flawless, almost too flawless, but there was a slight accent when she pronounced my last name, Choi, that made my stomach tighten. It was like she was testing me somehow, like she knew something I didn't. But that was impossible. I'd never seen this woman before in my life. She just stood there, waiting for me to continue. I finally glanced up, and for just a second, I saw something in her expression that unsettled me. Pity, maybe, or recognition? But I pushed that feeling down. I don't have time for weird gut feelings. Gut feelings are for people who don't have power. I said, "You start Monday," pointing to the door. That's all. She turned to leave, but at the doorway she stopped and said something quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Choi. My mother always said that one day things would change, that justice has a funny way of finding you when you least expect it." Then she was gone. I should have questioned that. I should have thought about those weird words, about the way she said them, about how much she seemed to know something I didn't. But I was too wrapped up in my own world, too convinced of my own invincibility. That's the thing about power. It makes you blind. It makes you think you're untouchable. 3 weeks went by. Min-jun was the perfect employee. She showed up on time, she was efficient, she never questioned my decisions or asked for anything. I made sure of that. I don't like my employees standing out or developing personalities. That's how they start thinking they're important. That's how they start demanding things.
The Monday before Thanksgiving, everything changed. I was leaving our building around 7 p.m. It had been a long day. Back-to-back meetings with international investors, supply chain issues that were costing us money, the usual corporate warfare. I was tired, frustrated, and I just wanted to get home to my penthouse apartment in the Distillery District and pour myself a drink. The elevator descended. Floor 31, 30, 29, the numbers counting down like seconds of my life I'd never get back. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I stepped out into the marble lobby of our building. Everything was quiet. The security desk was unmanned. Weird, but I didn't think much of it. That's when I heard the yelling. "Choi! Marcus Choi!" Men's voices, rough and aggressive, echoing through the lobby. I turned it around and my blood went cold. 3 figures in dark hoodies emerged from the stairwell, and they weren't moving slowly. They were moving with purpose, with violence, radiating off them like heat. My security guard, David, who normally accompanied me everywhere, grabbed my arm. "Sir, we need to move, now." But it was too late. One of the guys, tall, built like he spent his time in gyms and prisons, pulled out a knife. Not a gun, which somehow seemed worse. Knives are personal. They hurt in ways that are intimate. "Your father owed us money. Lots of money. 25 million to be exact. He died thinking he was free of the debt. But that's not how this works. Sons inherit debts, just like they inherit empires." I tried to process what he was saying. My father? Gambling debts? That made no sense. My father was careful with money, calculated, never reckless. But there was no time to ask questions. The second guy pulled out his own blade, and they started moving toward me. David tried to position himself between us, but he was 60-something, not a fighter. This wasn't going to end well. The knife came at me fast, aiming for my side. I lifted my arm reflexively, which meant the blade cut across my forearm instead of going deeper. Pain shot through me, bright and hot, and I saw blood, my blood, dripping onto the white marble floor. Everything happened in slow motion after that. There was chaos, screaming, the security system's alarms starting to wail, and then, out of nowhere, she was there. Min-jun came out of the stairwell like she was part of the attack, and for just a second I thought we were both about to die. But then she pivoted and her foot connected with one of the attacker's heads with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. He went down hard, unconscious before he hit the ground. The other 2 guys didn't even have time to react. She moved with a precision and violence that I'd never seen before, and in less than 30 seconds, both of them were on the ground, broken, bleeding, incapacitated. She did it without throwing a single punch. It was all kicks, elbows, pressure points. It was like watching a choreographed fight scene, except it was real, and it was happening in real time. When it was over, there was nothing but the sound of the alarm and 3 men groaning on the marble floor. Min-jun stood there, barely breathing hard, and she looked directly at me. "You should call the police, Mr. Choi. And maybe it's time you learned some things about your father." Then she walked away, leaving me standing there with a bleeding arm and a lot of very uncomfortable questions. The next week was chaos. The police came, questioned everyone, and basically confirmed that these 3 men were hired muscle for some underground organization I'd never even heard of. Apparently, my father had borrowed money from some sketchy people, loan sharks, really. And even though he died 5 years ago, apparently that debt transferred to me. Nobody from the company ever mentioned this. Not my CFO, not my board of directors, nobody.
When I asked them about it, they all gave me the same rehearsed response. We weren't authorized to tell you. It was handled at a certain level of management. But when I looked into it, there was no paperwork, no trail, no evidence that this debt even existed until these guys showed up trying to collect.
That bothered me more than the knife wound, which was healing fine. Something wasn't adding up. I kept thinking about Min-jun. Who moves like that? Where does someone learn to fight like that? I ran a background check on her, against my own company's ethics policies, I might add, but I was beyond caring about that stuff. What I found was basically nothing. She'd grown up in Toronto, had lived in various neighborhoods in Koreatown and North York. Her mother had died 10 years ago. Freya Song was her name. The dates matched up. Wait, Freya Song. My father's old business partner. The one he'd allegedly destroyed. I pulled up the company records from 25 years ago, before I was even working here full-time. My father had a partner. This was public knowledge that I'd honestly forgotten, or maybe never really paid attention to. Woman named Freya Song, excellent reputation, brought major contracts to the company. Then suddenly, she was gone. Bought out, the official story went, settled her stake in the company, moved on to other ventures. But I'd never heard what actually happened. I'd never asked. It wasn't relevant to my life back then, and by the time I inherited the company, she was already gone. Now I was wondering if that buyout was actually a forced removal, a theft. I called Min-jun into my office the day after her heroic rescue act. The whole building was talking about her now. She'd become this interesting mystery, the quiet girl in project management who apparently knew martial arts and had just taken down 3 armed attackers without breaking a sweat. People wanted to know her story. For once, someone in my company was getting attention that wasn't related to status or money. And honestly, it was driving me crazy because I couldn't control the narrative. "Why did you save me?" I asked her directly. No beating around the bush. No corporate speak. She sat down without being invited to, which was ballsy. Most of my employees don't sit unless I tell them to. Most of them act like I'm royalty or something, which I encouraged because it made managing them easier. But Min-jun just sat down, crossed her legs, and looked at me like we were equals. "Because you were about to die, Mr. Choi, and that would have been complicated for reasons you don't understand yet." That's not an answer. Then here's the answer you're looking for. My mother was Freya Song. She was your father's partner. She built half of this company, maybe more than half if we're being honest, and then she was pushed out by your father and his associates. She spent the rest of her life wondering what happened, why the man she trusted destroyed her. She died before she ever got an explanation or any kind of justice. I felt like the room was tilting. The floor beneath my expensive Italian leather shoes felt unstable suddenly. My father never mentioned— No, he wouldn't have. He was a thief and a liar. He stole her ideas, her contracts, her future. And he did it so cleanly that nobody even knew it had happened. That's the mark of a really effective thief, Mr. Choi. They do their damage and nobody notices until way later when it's too late to fix anything. So what? You're here for revenge? You attack me, save me, and now— You blackmail me? You destroy the company? You go to the media with some story that nobody can verify? She smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been planning something for a very long time. No. I'm here to show you what your father actually did, and then you're going to make a choice about what kind of man you want to be. She pulled out a laptop from her bag, a beat-up old MacBook that had seen better days. On the screen were documents, legal documents, contracts, emails going back 25 years. And as I read through them, my entire understanding of my father, my company, and my life basically imploded right there in my corner office overlooking downtown Toronto. My father hadn't just partnered with Freya Song. He'd completely stolen her business model, her vision, her entire strategy. He'd taken her investor contacts, people she'd spent years cultivating relationships with. He'd taken her supply chain innovations that she'd developed through countless hours of research and negotiation. He'd taken everything that made the company valuable, and he'd copied it, claimed it as his own, and then systematically erased her contributions from the record. Then, he'd convinced the board to buy her out at a price that was nowhere near what the company was actually worth. She'd gotten maybe $5 million. The company was now worth billions. The theft wasn't just financial. It was intellectual. It was personal. And it had broken my father's original partner so completely that she never recovered. Freya Song had gone on to start other ventures after leaving, but she never achieved the same level of success. She had her daughter, Min-jun, and she raised her alone in a small apartment in North York, working multiple jobs, always scraping by, always wondering what she'd done wrong. She used to tell me stories about your father. Not angry stories, sadder than that, which somehow made them worse. She'd wonder what she did wrong, where she went wrong to deserve being betrayed like that. It took her years to realize that she didn't do anything wrong. She just trusted someone she shouldn't have. And that realization, that she'd been a fool to trust, it destroyed her more than the financial loss ever did. So you came here? I came here to work for you, to understand what you were like, to see if you were like your father or if there was any hope for you. And after watching you for 3 weeks, you know what I realized? You're worse than he was in some ways. At least my mother knew your father. They had history, they had shared meals together, celebrated victories together. You don't even know the people you step on. You just step on them because you can, because it's convenient, because you've never had to face any consequences for treating people like they're disposable. She was right. I knew she was right. And that realization hit different than anything else in my life had hit before. It wasn't guilt, exactly. I'd trained myself not to feel guilt because guilt is paralyzing and useless. But it was something close to shame, which was worse, because shame means you understand that you should have known better. "What do you want?" I asked her, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. "I want you to read these documents. All of them. I want you to understand what your father did and what it cost my mother, what it cost me growing up watching my mother work herself to exhaustion trying to provide for us while your family lived in mansions and vacationed in places we couldn't even dream about. And then, Mr. Choi, I want you to decide whether you're going to be the same kind of man your father was, or whether you're actually capable of change. Because that's the real question, isn't it? Can people like you actually change, or are you so far gone that redemption isn't even possible anymore?" She stood up and left my office, leaving me alone with the laptop and all those documents that proved everything she'd said was true. I didn't leave my office that night. I sent my assistant home. I told security I'd lock up myself. And I read through every document, every email, every contract. The more I read, the worse I felt. Not because I was guilty of what my father had done. I wasn't even working here when most of this happened. But because I was realizing how fragile power actually is. If my father could steal an entire company's intellectual property and get away with it for decades, then anyone could do it to me. My empire wasn't built on anything solid. It was built on the same foundation of manipulation and lies that my father had used. Around 3 in the morning, I found something in the documents that made my stomach drop. There was an email from my father to his lawyer dated about 6 months before Freya was pushed out. In it, he explicitly outlined his plan to steal her work and framed the buyout as her decision. But here's the thing that really got me. He copied someone else on that email. My mother. My mother knew. She knew what he was planning and she didn't stop it. Or did she? I kept reading and I found more emails. These ones were from my mother to Freya, sent from a personal email account that I'd never known existed. In them, my mother was warning Freya. She was telling her to get a lawyer, to protect herself, to document everything, but Freya didn't listen. Or maybe she did listen but didn't believe that her partner would actually go through with it. Trust makes you vulnerable like that. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. I told them everything about the debt collectors who weren't really debt collectors, about the people who showed up at our building, about why they actually came. I told them about Freya Song and what my father had done. I showed them the documents. The board was divided. Some of them were worried about legal repercussions if this got out. Others were more concerned about the company's stock price and what would happen if shareholders found out that our entire empire was built on stolen intellectual property. One guy, Harrison, who'd been on the board since before I was born, actually said this: "Does anyone else have to know about this? I mean, she's dead, her daughter doesn't have legal standing, we could just move on." That's when I realized that this corruption, this willingness to just accept stolen wealth and move forward like nothing happened, wasn't unique to my father. It was systemic. It was woven into the fabric of how we did business. It was in the culture of the company, in the expectations of the board, in everything we'd built. And I'd been perpetuating it without even realizing it. I made a decision that day. It was probably the most rational decision I'd made in years, which was ironic because it was also completely irrational from a pure financial standpoint. I contacted what was left of Freya Song's estate. According to the documents Min-jun had shown me, my father had actually left records of the original deal hidden in his personal files. He'd kept them, maybe as insurance, maybe out of some twisted sense of pride. But they existed, and they showed exactly what he'd stolen and what it was worth. What my father owed Freya, adjusted for inflation and the actual value of what he'd stolen over 25 years, came to approximately $430 million. I decided to pay it. Not all at once. The company couldn't absorb that kind of loss all at once without collapsing and taking thousands of jobs with it, but I set up a fund. I structured it as a series of payments over 5 years. I made sure that Min-jun Song got control of it, not because I felt guilty, but because it was what was owed to her mother's memory and to her. The board fought me on it. 3 members resigned. 2 threatened lawsuits. Our stock price dropped by 15% when the news leaked out. Business magazines wrote articles questioning my competence. There were calls for me to step down. It was chaos. But here's where the story takes a turn that I didn't see coming at all. After I'd made the decision to pay back the debt and set up the fund, Min-jun came to my office again. This time, she seemed different. Less angry, less like someone on a mission for revenge.
She seemed tired, honestly, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally put it down. "There's something else you should know," she said. "My mother didn't just lose money when your father pushed her out. She lost her sense of security. She lost her confidence. She spent years wondering if she was good enough, if she'd imagined her own talents, if she'd actually contributed anything valuable at all. That kind of psychological damage, it doesn't go away. It stays with you. It stayed with her until the day she died. I'm sorry for what happened to her. I really am. Don't apologize to me. Apologies are meaningless when they can't change anything. But you should know something else. After my mother left the company, she started a new business, alone, without your father's help or his connections. It failed. Completely failed within 2 years. But before it did, she hired someone to help her run it. Someone she trusted, even after everything that had happened. Who? You're not going to like this, but it was your mother. I felt my stomach drop. What? Your mother was the CFO of my mother's company for almost 5 years. They were friends, actually. More than friends, really. Your mother was one of the few people who believed in my mother after everything fell apart. Your father never knew because your mother didn't tell him. She was helping my mother in secret, using her own money sometimes when the company was struggling, connecting her with investors who wouldn't report back to your father. This was not information I had. Nobody had ever mentioned this to me. My mother had never said a word about it. It made me wonder what other secrets my family had been keeping. What other lies had been woven into the fabric of my entire life? Why didn't you just tell me this from the start? I asked. Because I needed to see what you were made of first. I needed to know if you'd do the right thing because it was right, or if you'd only do it when you were forced or when it benefited you somehow.
There's a difference between doing good because you want to look good and doing good because it's the right thing to do. And I needed to know which one you were. She was right again. She was going to be right about everything, wasn't she? The Thanksgiving that year, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I went to visit my mother at her house in Scarborough. She was living alone now, my father dead for 5 years, my siblings scattered across the country pursuing their own careers. She was lonely, though she'd never admit that directly. Korean mothers don't really do vulnerable like that. They hide everything behind this mask of strength and duty. I showed her the documents that Min-jun had given me. I showed her the payments I'd made to Freya's estate, and I asked her directly about her friendship with Min-jun's mother and why she'd never told me about any of it. She cried. Actually cried. I hadn't seen my mother cry since my father's funeral, and even then she'd hidden it from most people. The shock of seeing her break down like that was almost worse than all the other revelations combined. "Your father was a good businessman, but a terrible man," she said through tears. "He took what didn't belong to him." When I found out what he'd done to Freya, I felt like I had to do something. It wasn't much, helping her for a few years, believing in her when nobody else did, but it was something. Your father never knew, and I wasn't going to tell him, because he would have seen it as a betrayal of his interests, of the family. But you're not your father, Marcus. You're not. You have a choice about what kind of man you're going to be. And what you did, paying back that money, that was the right choice. That was the brave choice. That Thanksgiving dinner, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I actually cooked. I made Korean food like my mother taught me when I was young. Kimchi jjigae, bulgogi, japchae, the whole traditional spread. And I invited Min-jun and my mother. And we sat around a table in my penthouse apartment overlooking Toronto, the CN Tower lit up in the distance. And we ate together as if we were family, which, in a weird way, we kind of were. We were bound together by the sins of my father, by the courage of Freya Song, by the choices we'd all made to try to make things right. The truth about what happened is complicated and involves corporate espionage that I still don't fully understand. The men who attacked me in the lobby weren't really there to collect a gambling debt from my father. That was a cover story designed to intimidate me. They were actually hired by a competitor who'd gotten wind of my plan to restructure the company and make it more ethical. They wanted me vulnerable, scared, willing to sell. But Min-jun knew the attack was going to happen. She had overheard a conversation between a member of our board and representatives from the competitor. She'd pieced together what was happening, and she'd decided to intervene. Not because she had any loyalty to me, she didn't, but because she wanted to protect her mother's legacy. And my destruction would have complicated that. So she saved me, and in doing so, she forced me to confront everything I'd been hiding from, everything I'd been pretending didn't matter. The weird part is how much the company actually improved after that. Turns out, when you actually respect your employees and pay them fairly and don't operate on a foundation of theft and lies, people want to work harder. They believe in what they're doing.
We brought on new investors who were interested in ethical business practices and long-term sustainability rather than just quarterly profits. We restructured our supply chain to be more environmentally conscious. We started giving back to the community in Toronto, funding programs in Koreatown, supporting small businesses, creating scholarships for kids from immigrant families. My stock price dropped initially. A lot of investors didn't understand why I was doing this. Wall Street doesn't reward ethics, it rewards profits. But over time, the market corrected itself. We became the kind of company that talented people actually wanted to work for rather than just tolerate. We won awards for workplace culture. We got written up in business magazines as an example of how to do capitalism differently. And honestly, I slept better at night. Min-jun eventually got promoted. She moved out of project management and into strategic operations. She was good at it, better than me in many ways, if I'm being honest. There was this quiet confidence about her, like she'd been preparing for this role her entire life. She understood how to build something sustainable rather than just something profitable. One day, about a year after she saved my life, I asked her why she'd really done it. "Why what?" she said. "Why did you come work for me at all? If you hated me so much, if you were so angry about what happened to your mother, why didn't you just go to the media? Why didn't you destroy me?
You had all the evidence. You could have bankrupted me, ruined my reputation, taken everything. So why didn't you? She thought about it for a long moment, looking out the window at the Toronto skyline. Because my mother wasn't a vengeful person. She was a believer in second chances and redemption. She believed that people could change if they were given the right opportunity, the right push. I didn't believe that when I first took this job. I thought you were just like your father, beyond saving. But working here, watching you, seeing how you eventually did the right thing even when it cost you, it reminded me that maybe my mother was right. Maybe people are capable of more than we think. Maybe change is actually possible, even for people who seem completely lost. Here's what I've learned. Wealth is fragile. Power is fragile. Everything we think is permanent is actually just one decision away from falling apart. The only real wealth is the people in your life who matter, the decisions you make when nobody's watching, the person you choose to be when you have all the power in the world to be someone else. My father built an empire on lies and theft. I inherited that empire, but I've spent the last few years trying to rebuild it on something more solid, on fairness, on respect, on actually giving a damn about the people's labor makes everything possible. It's not perfect. We still make mistakes. We're still learning. But here's the thing about gratitude, and I mean real gratitude, not the performative kind where you say thanks and forget about it 5 minutes later. Real gratitude changes you fundamentally. It makes you aware of how easily things can be taken from you, how dependent you are on the choices other people make about your life, how much you owe to people you've never even met. Min-jun saved my life. Not just in that lobby, though she literally did that too. She saved my life by showing me what I was becoming, by holding up a mirror that I couldn't look away from. And in doing that, she also honored her mother's memory, not through revenge, but through redemption. Thanksgiving used to be just another day to me. Another day to work, another day to chase money I didn't need, another day to ignore the people who actually mattered. But last year, for the first time in decades, I actually sat down and thought about what I had to be grateful for. I was grateful for Min-jun's courage in walking into my life. I was grateful for my mother's secret kindness that she'd shown Freya. I was grateful for the second chance that nobody actually owed me. And I was grateful for the reminder that the empire I thought I'd built was actually just sand, and that there are more important things than sand. So if you're watching this and you think you're untouchable, think again. If you think you can step on people without consequences, think again. If you think power is about how much money you have or how many people you can dominate, think again. Because one day, someone you underestimated is going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget. And if you're smart, if you're capable of change, you'll actually learn from it instead of just repeating the same patterns over and over. That's the real test, isn't it? Whether you're capable of becoming better than you were, whether you can look at your mistakes and actually do something about them, rather than just making excuses. Next time, we're talking about the biggest corruption scandal in tech history and how one whistleblower took down a billion-dollar empire with nothing but evidence and courage. You won't believe the connections this story has to what we just talked about. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. Trust me, this is a story everyone needs to hear.